Shady's place, May 28th.
May 27th.
Sorry, May 27th. Can't read tonight. 1936. Page 11. I swung around in the dimming light. A man stood holding a pitchfork as tall as he was and only slightly thinner. So what does this tell us about Shady if a pitchfork is only slightly thinner?
He's skinny.
Pretty thin. Everything about the man was thin. His clothes, his hair, even his scruffy whiskers were sparse on his face. Is this yours? He asked.
So that was my line.
Well, it's going to take us forever to do it that way.
No, it's not. Is this yours?
He asked. At first, I thought he meant the pitchfork, and then I saw the compass dangling from his fingers. I checked my satchel in a panic. The outside pocket had torn open when I'd fallen.
I'm Shady Howard. You must be Gideon's girl.
I let out the breath I didn't know I'd been holding. He handed me the gold compass. I hung it around my neck and tucked it into my shirt.
When you didn't get off at the train, I thought you might be making your own way into town.
He said it like he had jumped from a train or two himself, with his worn plaid shirt and brown pants that had been stitched and patched. He looked the part. Are you related to Pastor Howard, the preacher at the First Baptist Church?
Well, there's folks that call me Pastor Howard, but you can call me Shady.
I kept my distance, not knowing exactly what he meant. Well, do they call you that because you are the preacher at the First Baptist Church?
Well, it's kind of an interesting story.
He started walking using his pitchfork as a walking stick.
You see, I'm what's called an interim pastor, meaning the old one left and I'm just filling in till they can get themselves a new one.
Well, how long have you been filling in? I asked, thinking maybe he hadn't had time to order his preacher clothes yet. Or shave.
Yeah. 14 years now, give or take.
14 years you've been filling in.
Filling in.
I think he's permanent. Oh, I worked to put on some manners. So you weren't in the church business when my daddy was here?
No, I wasn't.
Well, I'm Abilene. I'm 12 years old and a hard worker, I said, like I had 100 other times in as many towns. So I guess you got the letter my daddy sent telling y'all I was coming? Mind you, I don't really say y'all, but it's usually best to try and sound a bit like the folks whose town you're moving into. Never being in Kansas before, I wouldn't know for sure, but I imagine they said things like y'all and up the road a piece and the weather's coming on.
You reckon?
Are you... Oh, wait, sorry.
Me. Are you hungry?
Shady asked.
My place is just up the road a piece.
Well, there it was, up the road a piece. Funny how people who know exactly where they are can talk so much about directions. But I guess those who don't just keep moving straight ahead. You don't need much direction for that. No, sir, I'd had only a hard-boiled egg on the train, but I was here under his hospitality, and I didn't feel right asking for food so soon.
Well, we'll just head into town then, as I need to pick up a letter.
There would still be daylight enough to take a look around town. As we began to walk, Gideon's stories came back to me in flashes like views between the trees from a train window. People bustling in and out of colorful storefronts with bright awnings over the windows, unusual sounding names painted on the doors like Matinopolis Meat, Santoni's Bakery, Ackerson Feed and Seed. Walking in step with Shady, I tried to conjure up something smooth and sweet from those stories, but looking around, all I could muster was dry and stale. Up and down Main Street, the stores were dingy, gray. Every third one was boarded up. The only awnings left were torn and saggy. There wasn't an ounce of bustling to be had, just a few tired souls holding up a doorway here and there.
What they meant by holding up a doorway is they were all just kind of leaning on the doorway. They weren't really holding it up.
So when Gideon had lived there, he described it as a bustling place. And now she gets there and they're boarded up and it's all dirty and gray. Well, the time has changed. Now we're in the Great Depression.
Things have changed in 20 years in Manifest, Kansas.
But then hard times are a penny for plenty. That means they're all over. They call it a depression, but I'd say it's a downright rut and the whole country's in it. There was a big gingerbread-like house sorely lacking in paint. A proper-looking lady sat quietly in a rocking chair on the porch, not having the life in her to rock. A barber, leaning against his shop door, stared as I passed. A lady in the grocery store fanned herself as a little dog yapped through the screen door. For some of the glares I got walking up the board sidewalk, I figured these folks would rather suffer through hard times on their own than have a stranger come in and witness their misery. We didn't slow down at the post office. I thought you were picking up the mail.
Well, not mail, just a letter from Hattie Mae at the newspaper.
Hattie Mae Harper, the Huckleberry Queen of 1917?
Well, she's Hattie Mae Mackey now, but that's her.
So it's the woman that writes the column.
Yes.
At least there was something familiar in this town. I wondered if Hattie Mae had kept her news auxiliary. The Manifest Herald newspaper office was about centered on Main Street, and we walked into a holy mess. Newspapers were stacked 2 and 3 feet tall. A typewriter sat on a cluttered desk, its keys splayed open, with some scattered on the desk like it tried to spell explosion, and the explosion happened. So a typewriter, it's got a keyboard like a computer. But instead of you typing like you do on a computer and it just showing up on the screen, you would push like the H, and then a little arm would come up that had a stamp on the end of it for H, and it went, and then you would type E, and it would
go up and go on a ribbon, which would then press against the paper. The ribbon had ink in it. So that's what made the E or the H on the paper.
So it was basically like stamping letters over and over and over again. And you know how if you make a mistake on your computer, you just hit backspace? Well, that was a whole thing. You had to get like correction tape or scratch it out, or
in 1936 they didn't have any correction tape.
No.
And you didn't make mistakes, or you did scratch it out, or you just started all over by pulling the first paper out
and start all over again. Yeah. Now,
so a good typist was worth his or her salt.
When I took typing in high school, we didn't have computers until I was in high school, and then when I took typing, it was on a computer, or it was on a typewriter, and it was so loud in that room because it was clack, 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 everybody all at once.
And the best typewriter ever was the IBM Selectric 2. It was fast, it was electric, it was also quieter, and it even had an automatic correction ribbon in it, so you could back up, click, 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 and it would back up and correct the last so many letters, and then you could type in the correct letters.
And basically what it would do is like just put a little piece of white out over the letters that you messed up on.
Oh, sweet.
Yeah, but they didn't have that in 1936.
They did not.
So,
they also didn't have air conditioning.
So
and did I mention this is going to be a hot summer?
So all these little stamp letters have come out of her typewriter, and it looked like she tried to spell explosion, and then it happened. Okay. Shady, that you? A woman's voice hollered from the back. I'm just getting ready to close up. Thanks so much for coming by to pick up. A large woman came out from the back room, her hair in a frazzled bun. She caught sight of me and her hands went to her face. Well, aren't you a little darling? You must be Abilene. Yes, ma'am. My, but you do look like your daddy. She pressed me to her warm bosom and I felt her catch her breath. When I looked up at her again, her eyes were wet. Would you like a soda pop? Well, of course you would. You go right on back and get yourself a nice cold bottle. We got Coca-Cola and Orange Crush. Now take your pick. And there's a couple of sandwiches in there. One's cheese and one's meatloaf. You help yourself now and don't tell me you're not hungry. Well, that's a treat.
Oh, Coca-Cola on ice.
Okay, I said. I started to make my way through the maze of newspapers. Those sandwiches sounded good. You'll have to excuse the mess. Uncle Henry insists on saving all these old papers, but my husband Fred is finally going to build a storage shed out back, so I'm trying to get them organized. I've had your very first news auxiliary my whole life, I blurted out. Oh my heavens, how'd you get a hold of that piece of antiquity? She laughed and her body jiggled. Have you been writing that column all this time? You mean all the who's, what's, why's, when's, and where's? Well, yes, I suppose I have, and thanks to the Depression, I've also been promoted to the copy editor, the typesetter, and the coffee maker extraordinaire. So, because of the Depression, they've had to let everybody else go, and now she is in charge of doing everything. Say, if you find yourself with any spare time, you could come and help me if you'd like. As you can see, there are plenty of old newspapers that need to get put in order. If you like reading ancient history, you might find it kind of interesting. I nodded, thinking that I would find that interesting. Now go get your pop and a sandwich, Sweet Pea, and help yourself to whatever newspapers you want. Uncle Henry won't mind me giving them away to someone who actually wants to read them. And that'll be all the fewer I'll need to sort through later. I found the pop chest easy enough and picked out an orange crush and the meatloaf sandwich. There was a built-in opener right on the side of the chest.
You know what an opener is? It's where you take the pop bottle, and it's a glass bottle, and it has this little cap on top, and you stick that cap in that opener, and go, you can hear the pop.
Shady and Hattie Mae were talking about how hot it had been and how there wasn't even a hint of rain. I gobbled down half the sandwich and let my hand run over the stack of newspapers I gobbled down the sandwich and let my hand run over one stack of newspapers after another. I felt like I was floating in a cloud that had passed from one year to another in no particular order. 1929, stock market crashes. 1927, Babe Ruth hit 60 home runs in one season. These were all in our PowerPoint. 1927, Charles Lindbergh flies solo across Atlantic in 33 and a half hours. Whew. I go across the Atlantic when we go to Europe, and
8 hours
it's like
going,
8 hours, and
10 coming back.
That's too many. 33 and a half. No, thank you.
And it was a loud little airplane with
no AC.
No AC.
Then a particular year caught my eye, 1917. Bone Dry Bill makes alcohol illegal in Kansas. That was the same year as Hattie Mae's first news auxiliary. That was when Gideon had been in manifest. My heart picked up speed. I didn't really expect to find Gideon's name like in the headlines or anywhere else in the paper for that matter, but I might come to know this town a little better through the articles and stories from when he was here. This town where he had spent time as a boy, this town where he had chosen to send me. You find yourself a soda pop, Sweet Pea? Hattie Mae called. Do I need to come and rescue you from that bottomless pit of newspapers? Coming, I called. You sure it's okay if I take a couple papers, something to read while I'm here? Oh, go right ahead. I thumbed through a stack of papers and chose the only two I found from 1917. July 16th and October 11th. I tucked the papers into my satchel and went back to the front room. Hattie Mae was talking in a hushed voice to Shady. Her face looked a little drawn and worried as she whispered. Okay, Shady, she needs to know. But she perked up when she saw me. Just listen to me yammering on. You've had a long day, Sweet Pea. You need to get refreshed for the last day of school tomorrow. Okay, two things about this. Hattie Mae just said, Shady, she needs to know. Sounds like they know something she doesn't.
Yeah.
And she needs to get refreshed for the last day of school? Who starts school on the last day of school? I mean, think about our last day of school and how absolutely wacko it is. And imagine trying to start on the last day.
No, thank you.
Crazy. That must have been what they thought I needed to know. School, I sputtered on my last swallow of orange pop. But it's summertime. I looked pleadingly at Shady. Don't folks around here have to be bringing in the sheaves or something? He gave me an apologetic look as if he thought the same. We just figured you might like to meet some of the kids before they scatter to the four winds for summer, Hattie Mae said. I wondered who we was and how many of them I was up against. But my daddy will be coming to get me before school starts up again, I said. Then I saw Hattie Mae and Shady glance at each other, kind of uneasy.
Bum, bum, bum.
This is one of those read between the lines moment. They exchanged a look that made me feel a little wobbly and off balance, like I was standing in a train that took an unexpected curve, but I was probably just tired from my travel. Hattie Mae put her arm around me. Now don't you worry, you'll be just fine. As she squeezed me tight, the phone rang. Oh, that'll be Fred. His sciatica is acting up again. Back pain. And he's home with the boys. You know how men are. When they don't feel good, the world comes to a standstill. Here's the letter that needs fixin', Shady. She handed Shady one of the keys, one of the little stamps from the typewriter. The R won't type at all, and the L keeps getting stuck. You can take the whole thing if you want. I've got tomorrow's column done, so I won't be needing it for the time being. The phone kept ringing. I've got to get that, Shady. It's good to meet you, Abilene. You let me know if you need anything, you hear? Yes, ma'am. She picked up the phone. Hello? Yes, I'm coming. Oh, for heaven's sake, just leave it there and I'll clean it up when I get home. Shady picked up the discombobulated, I love that word. Discombobulated means it's all out of sorts typewriter. And we got while the getting was good. So they left. By then it was dark and Shady led the way down an alley off Main Street. We headed back toward the tracks and ended up at a weathered establishment that appeared to be a safe distance from the respectable part of town. Meaning it's a little shady.
It's worn.
I've lived in a lot of places. Barns, abandoned railroad cars, even Hoovervilles. The shack towns for folks with no money, named for the president before the one we got now, who didn't seem to know that the country was in hard times.
Hoover. President Hoover.
Yes.
They thought didn't seem to know.
He was in our PowerPoint.
Yes, and who was the current president in 1936?
FDR.
FDR.
So I was prepared for anything. Except Shady's place. A cowbell clanged above the door as we went inside. Pastor Howard lit a kerosene lamp and set it on a long bar top. There was a mirror behind it, a sawhorse in front with some wood clamped in a vise, and an abundance of sawdust all over the floor. To top it off, there were what looked to be pews shoved up against the walls, and the two windows had honest-to-goodness stained glass.
Well, this is it.
Shady announced as if that explained anything. I looked around not wanting to ask. It was like a jigsaw puzzle I had to piece together myself. Shady's place appeared to be, highlight this, 1 part saloon, 1 part carpenter shop, and could it be 1 part church? I must have been staring at the windows because Shady said
The First Baptist Church burnt down some years back. Windows and a couple of pews were salvaged, and they're being kept here temporarily until a second Baptist church can be built.
That why the pastor left?
Yep.
Shady answered.
I think his nerves were about shot by then. He tried to gather up some papers and scraps. Oh, that's not quote. Okay, sorry.
Right. He tried to gather up some papers and scraps of wood as if there were traces of the mismatched life that he hadn't wanted me to see. I looked at the floor. Footprints went every which way, probably from years of drinkers and churchgoers. I felt an ache in my heart that rose like a lump to my throat as I caught myself searching for a less busy part of the room. A small, still place where there might be 1 or 2 of my daddy's footprints left. She's really needing a connection to her dad.
Yep.
Shady tossed a block of scrap wood into an empty waste can, causing a big clang that echoed. He looked at me kind of awkward, as if he knew what I'd been searching for but couldn't help me.
The outhouse is, well, outside. And there's some cold cuts in the icebox. Would you like me to heat up some water so you can take a proper bath?
So an outhouse is a
bathroom,
but it's outside. Cold cuts are like lunch meat.
Bologna, probably.
And he's got to heat up water so she can take a proper bath. So there's no like running hot water, like you heat it up.
You get the water out of the pump, you put it up on the fire, and you light the fire, and the fire heats up the water, and then you put it in the bathtub, and you come back and you do some more.
No, thank you. I'm just kind of tired.
Well, your room's upstairs over yonder. I hope you like it,
he said with a quiet politeness. I wondered about Shady's jigsaw life, but decided not to pry. Not yet, anyway. My daddy Gideon had a healthy distrust of most people, but he trusted Shady, and so did I. Good night, I said, and climbed the stairs with my satchel. There was a kerosene lamp on the nightstand, but no matches. With the full moon beaming through the window, it didn't matter. There was a dresser with a pitcher of water in a bowl. Usually a wash required a trip to a nearby stream or watering trough, so I felt like royalty to be able to pour myself some water and wash the dust from my face and hands. I kicked off my shoes and felt the cool floorboards shift and groan beneath my feet. Now, floorboards can't actually groan, so we have a personification there, so go ahead and highlight that. The floorboards shift and groan beneath my feet, as if the room was adjusting to a sudden occupation after being long empty. Yawning at least 3 times, I put on my pajamas and slipped into my bed. It was cozy and soft. I flapped the sheet up and down, letting it fall gently on me like a cloud. I was drifting off to sleep when I remembered my keepsake bag. Having already come too close to losing something that day, I decided to do what my daddy always did. Anything special and important, he'd hide in an out-of-the-way place that nobody'd find. In a sleepy scramble, I fished the flour sack, a keepsake bag, out of my satchel and checked the contents. So she's carrying everything she owns in a flour sack bag. So it's what you used to buy flour in. And oftentimes they were printed with really pretty print on them because people would save the flour sack bags and make clothing out of them, like dresses for girls. It was too dark to read the return address on the letter, but I had it memorized. Santa Fe Railroad Office, 4th and Main, Des Moines, Iowa. It was the closest thing Gideon had to a place of residence. I rattled the 2 dimes, making sure they were still there. Finally, I took out the compass box. It was empty except for Hattie Mae's News Auxiliary, as the compass still hung from my neck. Deciding to keep the compass on me, I put everything else back into the sack. Now, where do I put it? It was usually best to find a place that was either high or low. Since I couldn't reach high, I decided to reach low. Putting my feet back on the floor, I again felt the floorboards creak and bow. Maybe one was loose enough to pull it up. I took a tentative step around the room until I felt one that had a little more bounce than the others. I knelt on the floor, and with a fairly easy push and pull, the floorboard popped up enough for me to get my fingers under it and pull it up. It would have been the perfect hiding spot, except for one thing. There was already something there. I pulled the something out, slow and gentle, and held it up in the moonlight. It was a Lucky Bill cigar box, and inside were papers and odds and ends. There wasn't light for reading, but I could tell that the papers were letters, thin and folded neat. One bigger page looked like a map. The odds and ends clanked inside the box.
You find what you need?
Shady called from the bottom of the stairs. Yes, sir. I slipped the papers into the cigar box and shoved it back into the floor space. My flour sack keepsake bag fit snugly beside it. Then I replaced the floorboard and crawled into bed.
Good night, then.
I didn't answer right away, but I could tell he was still standing there. Pastor Shady, How far do you think it is to Des Moines? There was a pause, and I wondered if maybe I'd been wrong and he'd walked away.
I can't say for sure, but you see that moon out your window?
Yes, sir, plain as day.
Well, Des Moines is a lot closer than that moon. Fact is, I bet a feller in Des Moines can see the same moon you're looking at right now. Doesn't that just beat all?
His voice was shy and tender.
I'll be right down here if you need anything. Will that be all right?
He asked. Yes, sir, that'll be all right. The pillow was cool against my cheek. It felt good giving in to sleep. Still, I brought to mind what I'd seen. The cigar box, the letters. Since Gideon had stayed with Shady, maybe this had been his room. Maybe I'd found Gideon's footprints after all. The breeze died down, but in the calm of night, my body still felt the movement of the train.